Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank everybody for coming this afternoon to join us for what I know is going to be an engaging discussion. My name is Marjorie Fuller. I'm the director of the Center for Black Culture and Research here at West Virginia University and the moderator for today. Um, and our panel discussion is entitled A Shared Experience. Black and Latinx people coming together in 2021. And I'll kind of go over a little bit of what we're going to talk about today, but this is going to be a very fluid and a very open discussion, a very honest discussion in which we expect everyone to feel free and safe to take a part. Um, in the United States, we know that race relations is something that we've talked about a lot, but we usually talk about it in terms of black and white. And that's to be expected given the history of race relations in this country. But we know that race relations is much more complex than that, and racialized dynamics take place within all races as well as between white and black people. For instance, even within the black race, there is some racialized dynamics. So we want to talk about those dynamics between black and brown people because we realize that there needs to be, through that shared experience, a coming together of black and brown people. Now, we're not indicating that that hasn't happened, but we know there are areas of the cultural experience that each group faces that are different from one another and that can cause questions, some conflict, and a resolution to that conflict is always our goal. So we're happy to have our panel here with us today, our esteemed panel, and I want to welcome them. We have Ms. Niara Campbell. She's the program coordinator over at the fabulous Student Success Center that is putting forward the RISE program that I think has helped so many of our students. We have Mr. Eric Murphy, our Assistant Director of the Center for Service and Learning, who is also our compatriot in arms, and we've done many programs with him and with the Center for Service and Learning, and we appreciate you a great deal. And finally, we have Dr. Ellen Rodriguez with us. She's the interim director of the LGBTQ Center and also someone that we do collaborative programming with on a regular basis. And we have great admiration for the LGBTQ Center and love working with you guys, all of you. So thank you so much for being here. And I want to ask each of you to take your turn and tell us a little bit about yourselves, what you do, your background, and then we'll move on from there into our discussion. We'll start with you, Nee, since you were the first and you're the first alphabetic in the alphabetical list of our guests. And we'd like for you to tell us a little bit.
Sure. So my name is Niara Campbell. Everybody that knows me knows I go by Nee. I work in the Office of Student Success and I coordinate the RISE program, which is a program near and dear to my heart. On a personal level, I am from New York, Brooklyn to be exact. And I grew up in a multicultural household. My dad is from South Carolina and my mother is from Costa Rica. And I enjoyed living and being raised in a multicultural household. Um, yeah, today I guess my take is really on how two communities really can live in harmony, right? But also not ignoring the fact that there are some clear blockages to that harmony. And so I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. Eric Murphy.
Oh, hello, everyone. My name is Eric Murphy. I'm the assistant director here at the Center for Service and Learning. And I guess my background would be I have been a practicing psychotherapist for almost 20 years now. And I've worked in primarily urban communities. in Little Washington, Pennsylvania, and Southwestern Pennsylvania. And as of recently, I have been the assistant director here at the Center for Service and Learning. And before that, I was the community extension agent creating programming for fathers. And I focused on the African American male um, father. And as on campus during that same time, I was working with the male group here on campus, which was a support group for Black men. As of recently, we do the social action clinic here at our office, and we promote students to find their passion. A lot of those things that we've been talking about have been underserved populations on our campus, to make sure their voice is heard and that they have the resources to actualize whatever that thought is, or that issue is that they're passionate about. And I'm just happy to be here today. And I see some people on here that are watching that are my friends since undergrad. Actually, Dr. Anderson was one of the first people I've ever done a program with, and we were in undergrad together when we did that. So I'm just happy to be here.
Thank you. Dr. Rodriguez.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today, for investing this time, sharing this moment with us. My name is Ellen Rodriguez. I am originally from Brazil, and I've been here in Morgantown and affiliated with WVU in many capacities for about 15 years, from student to staff and now faculty. My background, academic background, is multidisciplinary. I came from Brazil with a law degree, and here I applied my passion for justice by pursuing academia and investing in a master's in sociology and PhD in political science. Throughout my journey, I was able to work as an affirmative action and a diversity specialist here on campus, where I got more involved with the Latinx community, with African student organization, with LGBTQ community as well, given as I also identify myself as a member of the community. Um, and now I'm honored to serve our community by uh, applying these resources at the LGBTQ Center and serving currently as the interim director. On a personal level, as I mentioned before, I come from Brazil, from a family that largely identifies, well, looking through our eyes here, we say we are Black, but in Brazil, we identify as Afro-Latinos or Afro-Brazilians. And this connection with the Black movement in the US has been very strong, not only my sense of identity, but also my sense of community and sense of family. You know how we define family, right? Like not just relatives, like, but everybody else that is part of our village.
Thank you so much, all of you. Um, and so we're going to open up this conversation in our chat. But before we do that, I'm going to ask one question of each of the panelists just to kind of get the conversation rolling. And I think that that'll be, what do you feel are some of the significant barriers to productive relationships between these two very important and very similar communities?
I guess I'll start. In one word, anti-Blackness, right? It exists within the Latinidad community, and it is not, I would say, by individual choice. It's systematic. And so I think that's one of the huge, or the most significant blockage between more harmony between our two communities.
I think one of the things that I've been, I'm going to really take it more from a counselor position. I think one of the things that I've seen within my office has been around one of three different areas. It's been about politics. It has been about um, space, And honestly, it's been about the feeling of power in the community in regards to what's happening, because in most urban communities, there has been a major influx of with from people of Latin descent into those communities. So the feeling of disempowerment and oddly enough, colorism is coming back into a higher level than I've experienced before behind closed doors. People talking about what it is to be Latin, or what it is to be dark skinned, or what it is to have a foreign girlfriend or something like that. So those have been a lot of the conversations have typically been since the movement of more Latin into predominantly urban communities.
Yeah, my heart goes on the issue of identity. We have so much in common. We actually have much more in common than the lies that we heard from colonizers, from this idea of uh, imposter syndrome or internalized racism, or any silo that is created, even like racial identification or ethnicity, like all these boxes that are uh, masked as dividing us, when in reality our experiences are very similar when we talk about all these institutions that Eric mentioned, for example, and also on a day-to-day basis as we interact in seeking access to housing or education or employment, dealing with police and police brutality, and also looking back in our roots, where we come from, that influence of African identity, where you already see that history, that legacy of discrimination into our DNAs, but also you see that history of resilience that is often removed from the books in our educational system.
Thank you. I have a couple questions that I'll ask later, but I want to open it up right now to our audience to begin asking some questions of our panelists and to even make some comments if they would like to. Eric, do we have any questions at this time?
No, not at this time.
Okay, well then I will ask the question that I have. Uh, could you go on to talk about um, what it's like to be Afro-Latino versus and in dealing with those people that consider themselves just Latinx and the colorism that you're talking about. Could you go more in depth on in those areas? Because I think that's very interesting, and I think that it does play into the relationship between the Black community and the Latinx community.
So one of the reasons I use the term um, anti-Blackness instead of colorism is it's more of a rebellion against not just skin tone, but of culture and that acknowledgement of the African heritage, right? And so when we think about how people made their way over to Central America, South America, right? Um, it's almost funny that a lot of people sometimes forget that you know, when the boats came and bought slaves, they did not discriminate on where they dropped them off, right? And so it's that acknowledgement and that kind of rebellion against that history, and that I find really interesting. And I think that's why I like to use the term more so just anti-Blackness over colorism when we're describing some of those, some of that conflict, right, in between Black and Brown folk. And so another thing that I think really sticks out to me as just in my own journey as being an Afro-Latina, like, I mentioned earlier, my mother is from Costa Rica, and my dad is from South Carolina. Um, but even in my own family, you know, the people that identify as Black were lighter than than the people that identified as Latinx. And they did not use that term. That's a new term, but it was very clear that there was anti-blackness, even though you know, the skin tone was darker, right? It had to deal with like hair texture or color of the eyes or just your general like assimilation to white culture, that really made the difference. So for me, that's where it kind of played a role. I would say that even though that was a part of it, I still felt very loved, right? You know, my my grandparents still loved on me, you know, and my brother. Um, but you know, you can tell that that um, there was that need to kind of really assimilate, right, into white culture and to kind of rebel against Black culture, which was seemed less than. And it's really funny, you know. I think about the time and where my grandparents immigrated, right, which is in the '60s, and so I can definitely understand why that rebellion took place. Where if you were to go back to where they're from in a region called Limon, right? Everybody is Black. Everybody, everybody has darker skin. Everybody is brown, and so it wasn't necessarily a thing, I guess you would say, to like celebrate that more African heritage. But there was a piece, especially when I think about like my mother's like older siblings, right? There was a piece to go ahead and rebel against that and try to like other yourself a little bit.
Other comments?
Sure, I can jump on that. And again, like answering this question about what it means to be Afro Latina is, I can go in so many directions. And I liked Nee's approach to looking back in the family, because again, it's a terminology that I learned probably 20 years ago that I didn't know that's what I was until I came to the United States and I wasn't at the airport and I had this questionnaire that I had to check a box. And then I found out at the time they only used Hispanic, and I realized that I'm not Hispanic, like I don't speak Spanish. But all those countries from South America, including Brazil, were included in that cluster. And then reading the description, I found out, oh, okay, I'm Latina because I'm from Latin America. But culturally speaking, and looking back inside my house on what we did on a daily basis, I, in Brazil, identified myself as Black. And when, not only because of my family, but because when I was lucky enough, I had the opportunity to go back to a few countries in the African continent. And I saw old ladies on the street doing exactly what my grandma was doing at home. The way we cooked cassava, the way we ate gari, the way we danced to the drums, the way we learned capoeira in Brazil, the way we signaled like those social cues that things were right or wrong or accepted, unaccepted, how you would go about engaging in religious practices or looking towards everything, nature, and respecting our ancestors. Like that brought me so much more in common with that sense of self. And also, when I found out my history, that I actually genetically came from the Bantu region, the Bantu people, Bakongo people, that gave me so much peace to understand, oh, that's where this curiosity comes from. So I felt very lucky, very blessed. Now, the other side of this is that I would probably the negative side is that here I met many people who did not know this history and also assumed that just because I came from a place where majority of the population is identifies or is seen as people of color, they assumed that discrimination, prejudice did not exist in my land, which is not the truth. Discrimination, racism is strong and alive in Brazil and in many other countries in Latin America, Central America, Africa, places where most people are Black or people of color. Because of that, when I was here, um, it was almost like the experiences that I had and many other Latinx people and Afro Latinx people experienced were invisible or denied. And then looking at how I was interacting with landlords, realtors, employers, HR recruiters, I found myself like going through those same experiences that my that people from my community also had, not only Latinx people, but most important, most specifically, Africans and also Black people here in the United States.
Eric, do you have any follow-up to that?
Well, not being Afro Latin, I didn't want to offer something on that topic, but I will say, yeah, I think one of the challenges I've had, here just as a man of color, as a black man, I think not challenges, but just something that I've experienced here in regards to the interaction. I grew up in an environment where the 1/8 rule really said that I was that genetically that there was something special about being a man of color and from Africa, and my grandfather's from Liberia. So one of the things I only knew was about the strength of being me or the strength of being of my family. When it came down to in my interaction with people that were Latin, my mom, I grew up with a different, you know, you you my mom considered Latin people white, um, and that was just a no no. But then, and as I grew up in high school and in college, I found that we had much more in common than not. One of the challenges that I've always saw was colorism and the taking of space. When if you think about it, in Columbus, Ohio, where I'm from, the Latin community is growing. I can't think of the word for it. It's just growing. So in the urban communities, when it comes down to employment, when it comes down to culture, when it comes down to electoral votes and things like that, those have become some of the major issues. But again, as everyone said, we have much more in common than not. I think that one of the biggest things is the concept of race and the concept and the issues that come with colorism that divides us. And that division, if we really look at the game that we're playing and the game that we've been taught, we're still playing the game of divide and conquer. So I think that from my experience, it was really to say, how do we unify each other? Like, how do we get away from that piece of the game and realize that that piece of the game is a trap? So how can we work together for the common good and it be about us empowering our communities instead of taking away from it and doing crabs in a barrel?
I think that that is kind of followed up by the question that Keith Jackson just asks. He says, going back to the question of otherness and listening to Ellen, is the struggle to build solidarity challenged by our simplification of the question?
Oof, nice question, Keith.
Mm.
I don't think it complicates things as much as I think it gives a straighter line. Because we're really, when we're talking about it, we're talking about power versus not having power. So if we can talk about how do we empower each other, and we can look at the fringe on the jacket, or we can just deal with the jacket itself. And I think if we deal with the jacket itself, it's about political empowerment, it's about empowering our community, it's about understanding that our cultures are intertwined. And when we understand that our culture is intertwined, then we find that there is so much more commonality, and I can keep my flavor and I can appreciate your flavor. As long as we learn to appreciate ourselves first. I do not, I think if people, when people start needing approval from others, that's when we start messing up. It's when I dig me and I dig you and I get to know Ellen and I get to know about her culture and she gets to hear me talk about my culture and I get to explore what is my culture. Because if the culture I'm talking about is only the American culture, then I'm dealing with some surfacey stuff that has some lot of stuff in there that ain't about me. It's negating me. So when I could talk about how they empower me, and I could talk to a sister that has a culture and some richness that I could talk to her about the depth of her, then I get the opportunity to find me. So I think it's really about being vulnerable and being willing to be intimate and have that dialogue about power.
And I think that with African Americans too, we have such a culture within our culture, such such a richness of diversity in who we are because of the colonization experience that we have an understanding, I think, of Afro Latinos and Latinx people more than most others. And I think you're right that that solidarity really should be there. And Spencer Darden just said that he's interested in the idea of language. How might the way racism is used, implying it is owned by Black folks, and the identity African American contribute to the distance felt between Black American and Afro Latinx folks feel?
Mhm. That's
Good
interesting.
question. Good commentary.
Yes. And I think that goes back to the whole thing about sharing culture. You know what I'm saying? You start to think of the Latin people taking my culture, the Latin people taking my vibe, but really it's our vibe. So it's our vibe. And I think that we've all tried to create, something out of nothing, taking something and making it richer, adding flavor to it. And I think that as long as we stop saying this is my space and we say, how can we share space? How can we support each other? That's a commonality. And then, as Sin said about language, he's right. I think a lot of our language is, I know it is, it's based in that colonizer divisive conversation or language. And if we can move through that, not past it, move through that and understand it deeper, then we understand each other deeper. And then we can have a conversation about
And I appreciate Keith's question and answer also about the power of education, right? Because the more we learn about the other, we are actually learning about ourselves. Think about and what Eric just mentioned about the number of the Latino population growing. It's not only because that is a growth, but also because more people are embracing that identity and checking the box and say, hey, yes, I do identify as such. Because in the recent past, and I still have many friends today whose parents forbade their children to speak Spanish. So children now, many in college today, Latinx, first, second generation, who could not speak Spanish because their parents were so focused on assimilation
it. Yes.
and they were afraid that their child would be excluded from who knows what venues because they would pick up on some accent.
Yeah.
Today, in fact, one out of every four children who are on in the United States in K through 12 identify as Latinx.
Mm.
However, children, Latina children, Latinx children, they are four times more likely to be identified as having a learning disability. And this is happening here in West Virginia as well. And this is because they are bilingual or, because they have so much information, they have so much information to process, but they are identified as having a learning disability in
Yes.
school.
Yes. That sounds like code switching. You know what I mean? Like one of the things in the African American community we talk about all the time is about code switching in academia. And the reality of it is if you have a vast vernacular, I'm not really tripping on how you talk. Hopefully you won't trip on how I'm talking. And if we can have a conversation from our genuine, our most authentic voice, we will find genius in that. Just like you're saying about these young people who they had so much information. And really what people are trying to do is kind of not dumb it down, but make you mediocre-ish instead of allowing it to be excellent. And having a vast vocabulary, yeah, there's so many ways we can take this. You're muted, Mr. Bullock.
We're having questions are coming in and commentary. Um, we have Shaggy Flores. Even in modern times, in the film Judas and the Messiah, the young lords were reduced to side minions, when in fact they played a huge role in civil rights. Also, the film didn't show Latinos, primarily Puerto Ricans, who were also members of the Black Panthers, lest we forget that one of the founders of the last poets was Felipe Luciano. The concept of Black folks that can speak Spanish or are descended from Latin American and Caribbean locations poses a problem when the discussion is based on phenotype instead of the ties that bind the American diaspora.
There we go.
Good point. Good point.
Yes.
I think when we're talking about language, it is overlooked a lot that African Americans are also bilingual.
Yes.
And there was a period where we talked about and how things, because of anti-blackness, as Nee was talking about, because of anti-blackness, a concept that was put into place to validate Black English, which was Ebonics, was turned into a negative term when it was really designed to bring African American school children and their teachers into alignment with each other about the brilliance of Black English and how it developed. The same thing we see happening that you're describing with Latinx, Latino, or Afro-Latino children in school being discriminated against because of the way they speak. But one of the things that I wanted to mention was the term oppression Olympics. We talk a lot about who's most discriminated against instead of working together to make sure that no one is discriminated against. And I would like for my panelists to talk a little bit about that and what they think might be some of the ways that we can overcome that and come into alignment with each other around this. Because what has happened, that as I see it, and I'm not an expert in this area, but it feels like there has been an attempt to divide not just the people, but the resources that the people are obtaining, whether it be institutional or whether it be community based or whatever, so that there's almost like a fight over what's available rather than the dispersion of more resources by the institution. I'm going to leave that in your hands to either agree or, please, if you do, disagree.
I think that there is an opportunity to really understand just how systems work, right? When we're thinking about systems that affect our day-to-day lives. And so when I think of things like herd Olympics or thinking about hierarchy and oppression, that's part of the system, right? That's part of the turnstile that kind of keeps us in this place where we cannot truly empathize with one another. One thing that I, as far as the first question that you posed, one thing that I can help, I think would really help is better representation, right? There's a lot of talks, especially lately, about what a Latino or Latina looks like, and it's something that for me is still really trivial, right? Because Latinos and Latinas look like people in my family, and then you'll see other folks and they don't look nothing like the people in my family, right? And so I think I think that that's one step forward in kind of understanding that not all Latinos look like J Lo and Daddy Yankee. That's not the only way that they look, right? Kind of bringing that to the forefront, and on a more mainstream, in a more mainstream way. I'd like to see that, and I think that helps to kind of break down those myths.
Yeah. Who have you ever played musical chair? Is that how you call that game that you have a large number of people and just a few chairs, and then so yeah, like for a long time we heard the colonizer playing this song and telling us, "Hey, you only have these chairs, and now you have to compete with one another." And I'm sharing this example because the first thing that when Dr. Fuller said, I came to my mind like Audre Lorde, there is no hierarchy of oppression, meaning we should not be competing with each other for these chairs because there are plenty of chairs. And let's together stop that music and tell them to get us a chair for each person. Because when we look, for example, on our basic needs, housing, for example, we and how much do you spend in your how much of your income do you spend to provide a shelter for yourself and your family? Many Black and Latinx families who are renting a place today, they spend, like Black families is spending 23% of Black families and 25% of Latinx families spend half of their income, 50% of your income. So we are right there together experiencing that oppression. And that goes along in any other circumstance that you can think of. You think about driving. Yes, that is driving while Latina. I experienced that too. So yes, the acknowledgement that we have to take and moving forward is to understand that let's look at who is actually holding those resources from us, from our community.
Yes, I think that thank you so much for and I'm trying not to read Shaggy Forrest and stuff over here, but Shaggy, you are killing it over here in the comments. Jeez Louise, I dig you. And I think that Ellen, you just said it right. The one thing, and as someone else said in here, that divide and conquer. It is a divide and conquer that we are falling into. And again, if the students that are on here and other people who are on here are faculty and deans and things like that, it is our job to not just give the students this information, but to help them to cultivate strategies to not be a part of the divide and conquer. Like to cultivate a sense of self so that because if I love me, then I know I can love Ellen. I know that because I got to love me first though. And I think that creating that opportunity for our students and our campus to be able to recognize that that crabs in a barrel statement is a real statement, but there is no, but to have no barrel, to let go of the barrel, let go of the matrix that we have, the colonizer has put there for you, and to realize that when you let go of the barrel, you're free, and we can do this together. But then the core critical piece is, I believe, to walk with discomfort and find courage. I used to say walk with fear, but I think it's really just walking with this discomfort. until I find courage. And the courage to find out, to say, this is who I am. This is the vernacular I'm gonna use. This is my dialect that I'm gonna use, and I'm not gonna switch it up. And it's vast. So the ability to be me and to love you because I love me. That is the crutch of what we need to do here on a Division One campus. We have to be able to do this for our students, like like Nier's doing with the Rise program. Like things like that is what we have to do. We have to turn the page on the narrative and create a new one. Yeah, I just want to throw that out.
The comments are, you're right, Eric, the comments are killing it.
Dr.
Spencer's,
Anderson just threw something.
Amina's, thank you very much for that. That's a great point. And I think that one of the things that we also have to do is we have to be honest
Yes, ma'am.
about our backgrounds, the way we were raised, the things that we know we may not necessarily bring forward, but that are a part of our communities, that are real feelings that people have, and deal with those honestly and openly so that they can be eradicated from our communities. Because the lessons of childhood are powerful. And when those things are instilled in us, even when we reject them, they're still there and we have to examine them. An unexamined life is not worth living. So I think that dealing with those issues is really important. There are families that are divided over these issues, like Eric was saying, sitting around the dining room table, just like some of the political differences that people have. They have these kinds of differences too. And I think that equipping ourselves with these kind of conversations as we go into those places where, you're having those kind of conversations with people who believe what they're saying just as much as you do is important, because this is not just a personal journey. This is not just a personal endeavor. We all have to be involved in it to bring others into the fold of understanding and awareness. Okay. Thank you for these. We're going to save this. We're recording this. We're going to save all of these comments. We're going to save all of these websites, and we're going to, write a follow-up to this conversation. I think it's very important. Do we have any more questions for our panelists? If not, we are at 12:44 and Dr. Rodriguez has a class that is more important than anything else that she has to do. So we'll ask for some closing comments from our panelists, and then we will see if there are any other questions for our remaining two panelists before we close the program out. But I want to thank you. And Dr. Rodriguez, if you would go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you again. And the beauty of this time that we invested here is because we are talking about education and we are doing it. So thank you, Flores. Thank you, Amina. Thank you, Spencer, Keith, everyone who contributed to the richness of this discussion. My last 2 cents, I would say one is to, again, look into these educational resources that are being shared here and look back into your own family and your soul and the things that make you curious about life, especially because many of us who are Black, Latinx, Afro Latinos, we don't know the history in our families. I know many often is because it is painful. There is a history of sexual violence towards our women. I know I can trace back some of my history and my ties with Brazilian, indigenous Brazilian, and with Africans, but many of the information that is in our DNA is because it wasn't given through consent. You know what I'm talking about. I don't want to be too graphic. The other, so besides looking into that, is thinking intersectionally. I cannot leave this panel without talking about LGBTQ identity. Uh, ability, disability, veteran status, national origin, everything else that makes us who we are. You know, we are not just race, we are not just political identity. And uh, the same way you can be Black and Hispanic, Black and African, Latinx, like you can also be a beautiful person that embraces all aspects of your identity, which makes it difficult to navigate different circles. But the more we engage in this holistic view of who we are as people and community, more we push forward this love that Eric was talking about, loving yourself and loving your people. So thank you so much. I'm gonna accept your blessings, give you blessings. Ashe, the way we say in Brazil. And I will see you soon. Hope we cross paths again.
Thank you
Hello.
so much for being here. And we say ashe as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have a comment that she would like the thoughts from, it's to everyone, thoughts about what can be done to improve relationships.
Hmm. So I think that one of the things that as a, I guess, one of the things that I would say is there's a few things that we tend to do in relationships and that are always around the word expectations. Either we have unclear expectations, we don't have expectations, or they're too low. So I think that we need to have communicate about the expectations of relationships that we have with people, and so they are clear, so that we can be vulnerable with people and create healthy relationships, and not. I think you know instead of trying to trump each other's trauma. You know what I'm saying? Like mine is worse than yours, or and then we're just arguing about who was traumatized more instead of us talking about how can I love you more effectively? How can I get this? How can I truly see you? And how can you truly see me? So I think that really it comes down to, I think it was uh, Nelva Carey who asked that question. It's really about being willing to be vulnerable for the goal of intimacy, for the goal of connection. But yeah, I think the hardest part is understanding that we all are dealing with trauma, and to be able to understand that trauma, to understand that I've dealt with something, you've dealt with something, and love can conquer that by communicating about it, by being vulnerable about it, and being intimate, and setting an expectation of excellence. And to understand that the expectation of excellence is not in spite of the colonizer, it is because I am dope, and recognize that off the top. Because if you come to the table wanting somebody to tell you you dope, you ain't gonna be dope. You somebody else's dope. I'm gonna be dope because I'm gonna be dope because I was born that way. And hopefully I'll be able to find someone who loves me as I express that and find out who they are.
I think a wonderful point that Dr. Anderson just made, understanding how we participate in and reinforce white supremacy in overt and covert ways
That's right.
is really because we do practice white supremacy against each other and against ourselves. In the slave mentality that Black people carry forward,
Mm,
and the idea of inferiority that immigrants bring into this country with them can
spit.
definitely impact how we interact with each other. Um,
I have I guess I want to try to attempt that question, and just hearing your response and Eric's response um is what I really hear is healing, right? That sense of healing. But also with healing, and just as equally important, is justice. And so one of the things that I think can really help us move forward is coming together and talk about the systematic ways that we can really push the narrative and work towards better futures for our children and our communities. Um, Particularly, I'm going back to that wonderful piece of knowledge that Dr. Rodriguez dropped on us about school children, we know that it's happening with Black students using Ebonics and Hispanic students speaking Spanish. I think it's when we're thinking about justice, right, kind of coming together and addressing that problem, the systematic problem.
Agreed, agreed. And um, having language awareness is very important too. It's not necessarily that you're looking at speaking someone's language fluently, but many times language awareness is about having respect and regard for other languages as equal to your own. And that's not something that the United States is noted for.
Right.
We have a tendency to feel that the rest of the world, and I'm saying we because we're in this, we live here, we're a part of this, and we have to speak up because we expect the rest of the world to speak English, but we don't speak and don't teach our children to speak other languages in school, which I think is a real failing on our part. We should all speak, be multilingual, not just bilingual. And that is something I think that we need to change in our school systems. We need to change the way we teach our children as youngsters, as upon entering the educational system, who not just who they are and to value that, but who others are and to value that as well, to value other cultures the way you value your own.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, well, we're moving up on the end of our hour. Are there any, this is a great comment. I also recommend folks research more whiteness studies. It tackles the problem from a different perspective. The work of Nell Painter is no joke. Amen. And also to begin to become aware of white fragility, helps you understand those who are categorized as the other better, because there really is, in my opinion, no other. That is terminology also that I feel is somewhat discriminatory. But yeah, that's a great point. And then there are some more websites there that we will capture. Are there any other questions for our panelists? Because I will then ask them to make closing remarks. Um, and then we will close out our session. And before that, I'm going to throw in a plug. We have a program tonight also. Anybody that would like to join us again at 6 o'clock, it is called After the Capitol Siege. And we are going to have guests come in and talk about their perspectives and their predictions about what happened at the Capitol and how that has impacted us all. And we have one WVU alum who works at the Capitol right now who is coming to be a part of that conversation. So if you're free tonight, I think it's going to be a very interesting evening. So Niara and Eric, thank you so much. And I will let you make your.
Go for it, Nier.
Okay. Well, I guess with closing remarks, I don't know. I think everything that needs to be said has been said. And just that I hope for an opportunity to continue this dialogue and to expound further. I think there's a lot of great points. And if we're thinking about what we can do, right, pieces in a structure in a community, and what we can do to particularly push this narrative forward and bring this up and at the university in particular, I think that that's the next step. So I think there should be a part 2.
Word. I was going to say, Nier, I'm glad you said that, because not only am I thinking of part 2, I'm looking on this call, right? And I see people here, Michael Ellington, who one of my mentors. I'm seeing Tony Owens and Mr. Dean Reyes. I think this is an opportunity for us to create a safe space also for us to be able to talk about this ourselves. Like, you know what I mean? Like, why? not only will that help our students, it will help me be better for our students when I know that I'm a part of a community on this campus community. And it's not performative as the word that the students like to use a lot. This is a real opportunity. So why not us here today take that opportunity instead of and not complain about it, but do something about it. Let's eliminate crabs in a barrel and realize there is no barrel, and be courageous to go hard. Like if you're not willing to go hard, then okay, that's that. But let's go hard. We're a Division I super land grant institution. Why would there's only one thing that's separating us from looking like Cabela. You know what I'm saying? Let's do something different. Let's do something different. So we have that opportunity. So I'm just saying, for everyone on here, let's do something. Sean Hines, Keith, let's do something. Let's continue this. Dr. Miss Fuller, thank you for inviting me on this. I appreciate it.
And thank all of you for being here. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Nyara. Thank you, Eric Jordan, for running this. Thank you very much. And thank everybody for all of those honest and very insightful comments. And we will look into a part 2 for this conversation because it is an ongoing situation that we're facing and an ongoing conversation that we should have. Thank you for the honesty, that came out. It isn't easy to talk about who you are and where you come from and your family and the other aspects of our lives that we don't always share. So thank you for that. Thank you, everybody else who is willing to come forward and talk about your lives. And this is a safe space. So next time, we will bring you back and we'll do a part 2 and we'll add people as we uh, find out who's interested in participating, and we'll make this an ongoing conversation. Thank everybody who participated with us, and we hope to see you tonight at After the Capitol Siege.